would like to talk to you about why Tai Chi is a great tool for giving you the life you want. You may have an idea that Tai Chi is an obscure Chinese esoteric practice. You may or may not know that it is a martial art. You may think of it the same way you think about yoga or some other exercise. There are certain specific characteristics of this practice which make it an exceptionally strong choice for transforming your life. Not just transforming it by losing weight, not just transforming it by fixing a pimple on your face, not transforming it by getting a corner office or getting a wealthy boyfriend or a good-looking girlfriend or any of the other sort of stereotypic things that we think we want in life, but transforming it in a very global way. So before I talk specifically about how Tai Chi does that, let me talk to you about what Tai Chi is. It's an art form that is built on a tripod. And it's quite old, and so is the tripod. One leg of the tripod is traditional Chinese medicine. The second leg of the tripod is the martial arts of China that had a long and storied history over thousands of years with techniques derived from the way animals moved and tried and tested on the dusty road, and if they didn't survive and they didn't succeed, those techniques and those movements failed and were not passed on. You died. Nobody learned that from you. The third leg of the tripod is something called Taoist philosophy, which is very much the natural philosophy of people more familiar to us in this country like Emerson and Thoreau. So let's go back to the first leg and talk about health for a minute. We have gotten off the path of good health in this country because of a very particular thing that happened back in the 17th century when René Descartes, a French philosopher, began to separate in our cogitation, in our consideration, the mind and the body. And ever since, we've been struggling to reintegrate the idea of a mind and the idea of a body. And in fact, what we are is our material stuff, and we're also our thoughts and our feelings. And all of this is integrated. It's all one thing. Now, why is that true? It's true because our nervous system, which is both a physical and chemical/electrical phenomenon, looks like a bit of a jellyfish, and it has tendrils that extend down from the brain into the body. At the interface of those tendrils with the stuff of us that we normally think about, the meat, the muscle, the bone, the skin, at the interface between the nervous system and those other parts of our body, there is a symphony of chemistry and electricity taking place. And that symphony creates such an incredibly intimate and rich connection that we are, for all intents and purposes, inextricable between a combination between the brain/mind and the meat/body. Now, once we begin to consider ourselves in that fashion, we begin to notice that when we change our body, that is, when we do exercise, when we stick a pin in the hand, when we do anything physical at all, what we're doing with our body has an immediate effect, and sometimes a lasting effect, on our brain, on our mood, on our perceptions, on the way we see things, and even on more difficult to pin down functions of the brain, such as priorities and worldview. Conversely, when we change our mind, when our mind opens to new ideas, wow, the world is not flat, we also change things in our body. There are physical changes that accompany the changes that come from ideas. So a mind-body practice has a particular ability to work in a conversation between this stuff and this stuff and make a very compelling tool for change. So let's go a little further with this idea of health and how a mind-body practice can affect it. If you run or swim or do some other aerobic exercise which gives you endorphins, the body releases these internal chemicals and they make you feel good. And then at the end of their run in your bloodstream, they diminish and they are metabolized, and what's left is either a feeling of fatigue or a feeling of emptiness, or at best case you're back to where you were before that rush of endorphins occurred. If you were to couple the new sensations and new thoughts and new feelings that came with a good run with some new ideas, then you could say that at the end of the endorphin cycle, your brain would then be tickled by new ways of thinking about stuff. And so you could prolong the experience that the endorphins initially gave you. This is just one simple notion. We have health, and we're talking about the tripod that includes traditional Chinese medicine, the first leg of the tripod in Tai Chi. The second leg of the Tai Chi tripod that makes it such a terrific transformational tool has to do with something called Taoist philosophy, spelled with a D or a T. We don't know exactly when Taoist philosophy arose, but we can say that it's probably linked to shamanism, and it may go back 4,000 or 5,000 years, maybe more. And Taoism, of course, from the name of it, is based on the concept of the Tao. Now, there's a lot of different ways to interpret what the Tao means and what it is. Some people think that it's a sort of a shamanistic Chinese word for God. Some people think of it as a philosophical word for nature. Some people think of it as evolution. Some people think of it as natural forces that may have an intelligence behind them. Rather than try to explore philosophically what the Tao is, let me give you an analogy that might help you to see how it is at work in our world and in our lives every day. If you think of for a moment of the Tao as a river, you can imagine that there's this river running through life, and it's pretty much all-inclusive. It's everywhere you turn, there's this river. And we know, all of us, that there are a lot of different ways that people deal with the forces at work in their lives. So, for example, we could say that we all know somebody who denies there is a river, who jumps in and tries to swim straight across to the other side, ignoring the fact that the current is taking them downstream. And they end up, of course, somewhere not exactly where they were going to go, but they stubbornly trudge back along the bank. There are also people who see the river, jump in, face the current, and swim until they're exhausted and sometimes even drown. There are also people who see some place they think the river will take them downstream, and they jump in and they swim as fast as they can with the current in order to get there faster, perhaps before everybody else. Then, of course, there's the kind of person who sees the river, recognizes the power of the river to carry them along, and surrenders to the river, cultivates a sensitivity upon jumping into the river, a sensitivity to the current, the flow, the obstacles in the river, the twigs, the branches, the rocks, and using minimal effort manages to float through life, rarely sustaining more than a small bump or a scrape, and putting out very little energy, the minimum required to get where the river is going. This last kind of person is the Taoist. And in our lives, we probably recognize this model as somebody who always gets the great-looking date, always manages to get the offer for the promotion, always somehow seems to be in the right place at the right time, wins the lottery, all kinds of things happen, but never seems to be trying very hard. Doesn't seem to work harder than anybody else, just somehow it all seems to unfold naturally for them. And when you look at the course of their lives, you see that time after time, they seem to be in the sweet spot, or they seem to just be to have everything happen for them inexplicably. Does that mean that there never is a bump or a scrape? No. But what it means is that when you look overall at the course of their life, it has that quality. And that quality is the quality that Tai Chi can bring us. How does this work? It works because Tai Chi trains us to recognize the forces at work on us and teaches us how to move with them rather than wasting energy applying our force against a larger, overwhelming force. Yeah, I like to teach in the park. I like to be outside when I do Tai Chi. It's all about earth energies and human energy. Taoism is all about the energy of nature. It doesn't make sense to do it inside when you don't have to. Sometimes I worry about getting pulled over. It's not because I drive fast. More worried about that. Yeah, not everybody understands these things. So the third leg of the Tai Chi tripod that makes it such a terrific transformational tool is the connection to the multi-thousand-year history of pugilism in China. The Chinese martial arts are magnificent, and they are alternately very simple and direct and sometimes very flowery and elaborate, but what they all share is their effectiveness. They're effective because they were used by people to preserve themselves on the dusty road, whether it was to protect their own family, to protect themselves, to work as soldiers or bodyguards or policemen. There's just been a lot of time for these techniques to become refined. What we have left of them today are in some ways the product of evolution. And if they are still with us, that means they really work well. Because if they didn't work well, they would have been erased. We would have lost them on the dusty road somewhere where they failed and someone died. So the things that have been preserved are the things that have worked consistently. And Tai Chi draws heavily on them. Now, of course, Chinese Kung Fu, of which Tai Chi is a sort, has always looked very heavily to animals for inspiration. You can see the tie to Taoist philosophy in nature. Watching animals was a very early and obvious way to try to figure out how to make power, to see what nature has written as being the fastest, most effective, best way to subdue prey or to escape, to get a meal, to win a fight. So one way that the traditional Tai Chi training teaches the ideas of body mechanics that are so sophisticated in this art form is to use various tools in the curriculum. And traditionally those tools were weapons. Today we don't think of them as weapons, we think of them just as training tools, the same way you would think of a dumbbell or an ab machine or a bicycle. But because of course we're not out on the dusty road with a 7-foot halberd or with a spear. This is the age of firearms and of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons and biological weapons, and spears and knives don't seem quite as appropriate now. However, as training tools, they're magnificent. And one way of thinking about the value of some of these tools is, let's take for example the most common Tai Chi training tool, which is the Tai Chi straight sword. It's a double-edged, long, thin sword, usually a 26, 28, 30-inch blade, and a small handle for one hand. Now, I have read that some practitioners talk about sword training, and in their talks, they talk about becoming the sword. Certainly in Japanese arts, which are very sophisticated when it comes to cutting and swords, they talk about becoming the sword. In our Wild West, we think about becoming the bullet. We think about a guy with a gun and how is he going to hit that target and he'll be the bullet. Tai Chi really is a dramatically different approach to movement, to martial arts, to mind, and to body. We don't want to become a sword. No matter how magnificent a sword may be, no matter if it is full of beautifully layered, 1,000 layers of beautiful steel folded over and hammered and done by a master craftsman, even if it's worth a fortune and beautiful to look at and glorious to hold, it is still an inanimate object. And the only thing it shares with us in that regard is the carbon that is found in steel is also found in us. We don't want to become an inanimate object. We don't want to become a sword. We want the sword to become us. We want to follow that river. We want to feel and sense every energy and every movement around us. If we're going to wield that weapon successfully, we have to be alive and sensitive all the way through it to its end. We don't want to become an inanimate, insensate, dumb piece of steel. We want to enliven the steel so that we cannot, so much so, that we cannot even see where our hand ends and where the sword begins. If we're doing this really properly, we extend our chi, our life force, our energy. We extend our awareness, our intelligence, and our intention into the sword, so much so that touching the sword is the same as touching our finger. And we're able to feel and do just as we would if the sword were our hand, except that it's strong and it's sharp and it cuts. And this example is a very good one to help you understand why training your body and mind in a way that extends your awareness and your calm center and your sensitivity out into the world can reap great benefits. Traditional Chinese medicine is quite a bit further along than Western medicine in one specific regard, and that is that it never suffered from this idea that the mind and the body are two different things. And because that's true, it has always treated the combination as an energetic phenomenon. We are a phenomenon of energy that the Chinese call it qi, Qi, sometimes spelled CH''I. And that qi is vitality, it's the bioelectric energy of life, and there are, by the way, a bunch of other definitions for it, precisely because we don't know, in Western terms, what exactly it is. And the reason we don't know is a big subject, but the short way of understanding it is that it is a multifactorial phenomenon. That means there's a lot of different ingredients to it. And we tend to like to identify one thing and say, this is qi. Infrared radiation, low frequency sound, DNA, electricity, chemistry. And in fact, qi is a phenomenon of many different facets. But in any case, looking at the body as an energetic entity means that we have a much closer idea of how things really are than when we're just looking at the meat. And so when you inject that insight about how the body works, really, in concert with the mind, how it all becomes one thing, and you put that into one of the legs that holds Tai Chi up, then you have a real big advantage over many other things that you could be doing with your spare time. Stress, remember, is a construct of your mind-body. Stress is not something that comes in from outside. Stress is something that comes up from within and moves out. Circumstances outside your body, your environment, cause your body stress. Stress is something that your body creates in response to external circumstances. So, if you understand that stress is not an external thing that you cannot control, but stress, conversely and very specifically, is something that you create with your mind-body, then training and changing your mind-body by learning to relax, learning to breathe, learning to move, and learning to prioritize because you're embracing a practice that gives you a different philosophy and a different way of looking at life, has very immediate and measurable benefits in terms of the stress that you create for yourself in response to incoming stimuli. In addition to helping you manage stress, Tai Chi can do another very particular thing for you. It has all of the benefits of any moderate intensity exercise, with very, very few of the risks associated with injury from that kind of exercise, and also very few of the characteristics that many people eschew, many people don't like about doing moderate exercise. Whether it's that they don't like doing the same thing over and over, they don't like getting sweaty, they don't like a gym environment, they don't like running. I mean, you know, there's a litany of things that people don't like that give them an excuse not to do moderate exercise, which I define as something more than walking. So Tai Chi is actually providing you with all the benefits that many other moderate exercises do, and of course some additional ones. But it does this in a way that doesn't trigger that, oh, I don't want to do that, I don't want to get up and do that reaction that a lot of people have when they think, when somebody tells them, whether it's their doctor or a spouse, tells them that they have to go out and exercise, they need to lose weight or they need to get in better shape or whatever. And how is that true? It's true because, number one, Tai Chi is actually a very interesting and intricate thing. It takes quite a lot of study and thinking and practice to focus on it, and it's not boring. A lot of times, moderate exercise can be boring. That's why everybody does it wearing an iPod. Because you don't really want to be thinking about the pain in your ankle or your knee while you're doing it, or how out of breath you are. You just have to push through, and so you distract yourself. If you're riding a stationary bike at home, you do it while you're watching TV. If you're out on a jogging track, you use an iPod or an MP3 player of some kind. We do those things because we want to get away from the exercise and just get it done. Tai Chi is all about being present during the exercise, but being present in a pleasurable way. And when you focus in the way that Tai Chi demands, you get a very specific type of benefit that comes from using the mind-body the way it was designed to be used. And the benefits that come from that kind of thing include not only the physical benefits of moderate exercise, such as better aerobic condition, lower blood pressure, more energy, but also it has some mental benefits. Because one of the things that happens when you practice Tai Chi is you become very calm. You find an equanimity in your emotional responsiveness, which may be new to you and is especially delicious in a world that thrives on getting a rise out of us. Physical training is just now in the West beginning to discover how spiral training and spiral movements make you run faster, make you quicker, stronger, and top trainers all over the country are beginning to employ spiral movements as a way of enhancing athletic performance at the very cutting edge. Tai Chi has been doing spiral movements for 1,000 years. And spiral is an interesting shape because we see it when we look up at the heavens. We see the galaxies are in a spiral. We see it when we watch water going down the drain. We see it when a thunderstorm gives rise to a tornado. We see it in dust devils. It is the most common way that nature expresses power and movement. And in doing the spiral movement, Tai Chi can give us flexibility in a special way. And to help illustrate this, let me see if some of you may remember that there are little balsa wood airplanes that we used to buy and put together and fly, and they had a rubber band, an inexpensive toy, simple toy. And it would come with a rubber band in the package. You'd put the airplane together, and then you would stretch the rubber band from its origin at the little plastic propeller all the way back to a hook at the tail of the airplane. And you'd have to pull the rubber band to do that. And you would stretch it, and it would just barely make the hook, and you'd have to pull on it a little bit and hook it on. And then you would wind the propeller to get your little airplane ready to fly. Of course, what you were doing is you were storing energy in that rubber band, and then when you let it go, the propeller would spin and the airplane would go. If you were brave, you went beyond the first level of knots in the rubber band to a second level of knots in the rubber band. Of course, I say brave because if you go too far, you know you might snap the rubber band. But if you wanted your plane to go a little further and a little faster, you would do that, and you'd get a second row of knots. And if you were crazy, really embracing the risk, you might even go to a third row of knots on the rubber band, at which point you let it go and the thing would go boom and take off. The interesting thing is that when you retrieve the airplane after this, you will notice that the rubber band, which was previously tight on the airplane, was now sagging, and it would sag down beneath the body of the airplane. That's because spiraling movement like this stretched the rubber band just as effectively, if not more, than pulling on it. So many stretching exercises in conventional exercise, you assume a position and you stretch a muscle in a straight line. Tai Chi does every kind of movement in a spiral, so over time your joints and your muscles and even some of your connective tissue can loosen and become freer in your movement. So by definition, because this is a mind-body practice, when you are doing Tai Chi and you suddenly start to think about what's for lunch, or you suddenly start to think about whether the babysitter is reliable, or you suddenly start to think about that deal, that phone call you've been waiting for. The moment you are distracted from awareness and mindful attention to your physical practice right now, Tai Chi, by definition, goes out the window and does not return until you bring your mind back. So learning to pay attention to what your emotions are and what your body is doing and what your mind has a habit of doing in terms of distraction is a very useful skill. That mindfulness is much vaunted in meditation circles, and it's very, very present in Tai Chi practice too. So in the Amazon, the shamans use a blend of hallucinogenic herbs called ayahuasca. Ayahuasca puts you in a different state of mind. You see things, colors, realities. You see the world, at least their model of the world, is imagine frisbees with a pencil through them. And they're stacked one on top of the other. And your bellyache is on the frisbee down here, and the shaman travels up the pencil to the frisbee up here to do some work where he finds that there you've insulted a wolf or a spirit, or you need some negotiation to happen there. And then when he does that, back on this frisbee, your bellyache goes away. The interesting thing about these specialists, these shamans, is that the reality that they report is the same whether they are in the Amazon or in Japan or in Mongolia or anywhere else where these reality seekers slash medicine men slash village elders slash voyagers happen to do their work. And what that tells us is that even 1,000 years ago, when nobody went from Japan to the Amazon, when these people had no way of talking to each other, that there was in fact a deeper reality that was a universal experience for human beings. And that using various tools, trances, music, chanting, meditation, drugs, herbs, any of it, food, they were able, these specialists, these travelers, these healers, were able to use their technology, whatever it was, to access a body of information that turned out to be the same wherever they were and whatever those tools were. In other words, there was some objective reality. And today, we can access that same information without taking drugs and without going to a movie about it, just by accessing what is true according to the senses that we have had since we became human beings. An objective reality revealed to us by the senses that we all share. The problem is that in the lives that we live now, our attention is not on that deeper reality. It is constantly teased in this direction, by a deluge of data. There's very little wisdom, but there's a lot of data. There's very little reality, but there are a lot of little pseudo-realities, a TV show, a webcast, this video, music, a photo book. And mind-body practices like Tai Chi serve a very important function in an environment where we are constantly having our attention taken away from deeper knowledge of who and what we really are. It's not unique to Tai Chi. You can get the same thing in yoga, you can get the same thing in meditation and other things, other modalities. But what all those mind-body modalities share is that they give you a fantastic benefit. And the fantastic benefit is they rip you out of the world that you think is so important, the here and now, which is, oh, it's 8 o'clock, I gotta watch my favorite show, or, oh, it's gonna be 5 soon and I haven't finished that report for my boss. All the external focus that is on manufactured priorities and realities which we have made up in order to, quote-unquote, make a living or make our way through life. All these things that we've convinced ourselves are so terribly important. When are they important? They're important when you are in the survival mode. They are important when you don't have enough to eat. They are important when you don't have the company of friends and loved ones. They are important when you don't have a roof over your head. At all other times, these manufactured priorities should be and must be secondary to getting in touch with a deeper reality. And mind-body practices like Tai Chi really, really help you step out of the fray and into the cool, calm, quiet, deep reality. And in doing so, these practices make us all shamans. Throughout history, humankind has a habit of forgetting things it learned. We have cycles throughout history in every culture where we achieve things and then we forget them. We learn things and then they are lost. Think of the pyramids, think of the Mayans, think of the Great Wall. Knowledge, specific knowledge, is gained, and then somehow, whether it's a cataclysm of culture, whether it's a natural event, whether it's just the normal ebb and flow of biological organisms coming together and then coming apart, we lose that knowledge. Currently, we appear to be in a phase of accretion. It seems as if our knowledge is growing in leaps and bounds. All we hear about is how scientific knowledge is doubling every few years, tripling, growing by a factor of 10 every few years, blah, blah, and that all the things that we knew are being forgotten. And the truth is that although we are learning very specific things, we are also rapidly forgetting a lot of things. Some of those are the cultures and languages in primitive parts of the world which are disappearing at an alarming rate. So how do we discover what we've lost? The answer is that we have to cut through the noise. We have to reestablish our priorities. We have to simplify and quiet our lives in order to give that intuitive, innate, yin, quiet knowledge a chance to bubble up spontaneously inside of us. When it does that, when we rediscover the pure nature of ourselves, we experience that most marvelous of emotions, transcendence. That is the feeling, the vision, the sense that we are able to see through and above and beyond our immediate trappings and get in touch with both a wider and a deeper understanding of who we are and the reality that surrounds and includes us. How do we do that? How do we experience that transcendence? Well, the answer to that is that there are many routes to it. Prayer is one, meditation is another, mind-body practices like Tai Chi is a third. These practices serve to put us back in touch with the workings of our body-mind, the whole of us that has been artificially separated by events and prejudices and misunderstandings of the culture of the past 500 years. And in that process, in that little tiny diversion from the life path, that stepping out just for a few minutes from your busy day, a half an hour here, 15 minutes there, an hour there, where you are just focusing on what you feel, what you think, on yourself, on calming down, on getting back in touch with the meat of you and your material nature. Through that door is transcendence. Through that door is the peace, the harmony, and the happiness that all of us are looking for.